Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil Athletics. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
And I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
All right, Joe, spring is in full swing, and this past week was a bit of a mixed bag for Sun Devil Athletics. A couple of sports did amazing, going back-to-back when hoisting the conference championship, while a couple other marquee sports are scuffling a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've talked because the last time we did a show that I was on, I mean, I was super sick, so hopefully I was speaking English and coming through clearly and all that good stuff. But we are back here. Obviously, no off season, as you mentioned. Lots going on. Some real good things going on with some of those Olympic sports. Some of the higher revenue question marks. So good little bit for us to break down here today.
Yeah, a little bit later on in the show, we're going to be joined by DevilsDigest.com reporter Scott Sandulli to give a inside look at the Sun Devil baseball team as they hit the kind of the roughly the quarter mark of the season. Some good, some bad, and a lot of questions that we will break down. But before we dive into all that, let's catch up on some of the headlines that have come up as of late. A little bit of football just before we dive into some other stuff. First off, congratulations to former ASU quarterback Drew Pine heading off to Mizzou, presumably after getting his degree. So, putting the student athlete together.
Yeah, because that was the thing, and I assume that that's going down. I don't think ASU fans are keeping too close of tabs, but the plan that it was announced or at least discussed when he opted to leave ASU was that he was going to go back to Notre Dame strictly in an academic capacity, not participate in spring ball or have any sort of involvement with the Notre Dame football program, just to complete his degree. Obviously, a very prestigious university. Can't hate on that. It was always said that he wasn't going to play football again at Notre Dame and find a new home, which has chosen to do so at Missouri. So we'll see how that goes for him. I mean this earnestly. I certainly hope that it goes better for him there than it did for him at ASU, because it probably couldn't have gone much worse for him, and that's unfortunate for anybody between the injuries and just issues on the field. A fresh start is certainly something a guy like him I'm sure could sorely.
Yeah, taking a semester abroad, but to South Bend, Indiana. Good on him to get that degree, and good luck to him in the SEC. More as it pertains to ASU, this Wednesday, March 13th, will be ASU's Pro Day, perhaps the final ASU Pro Day, as the Big 12 this year is moving to a kind of a conference-wide Pro Day. But in Tempe on Wednesday morning, all of ASU's draft hopefuls will be working out for the collection of NFL scouts. Ro Torrence, of course, was the only Sun Devil that was invited to the NFL Draft Combine in Indianapolis. He did not run the 40 there, though there were some impressive measurables as to be expected from that big-bodied physical corner that we saw Ro Torrence over the last couple of years. But some other guys, maybe the Deshaun Mallory's of the world, like maybe perhaps a guy like Trey Brown will be able to catch the eyes of the scouts, and maybe slip into those later rounds.
Yeah, and that seems to be the highest potential for ASU. Maybe get a guy or two picked, kind of like last year with Nesta Jade Silvera as a defensive lineman. Maybe Mallory can be in a similar mold there as well. Talked about Torrance. Obviously, the measurables are off the charts. You're seeing a lot of these, scouting accounts on Twitter and things like that, ones that may not have been familiar with Torrance as a player at ASU, and they just see the height and weight for his position. Obviously a talented player, but when you see those measurables, that really, really catches your eye. Combine that with some film, and he could have a shot as well. I mean, those are two guys that I would imagine they'll get drafted or quickly scooped up as undrafted free agents. So you certainly want to see ASU have its name called at some point over the course of the draft, and they should. Again, maybe one or two guys is probably the most realistic outlook for that. But it wouldn't be a massive shock if they happen not to have anybody drafted. But you like the odds, at least in the late round type of situation.
Yeah, statistically speaking, an NFL draft combine, is a pretty good indication that you might hear your name called. I think that's usually a pretty small percentage, so it bodes well for Rowe. But again, perhaps some of the other guys can make some waves, catch some eyes, and at least get into camp. Usually, we see several Sun Devils at least get a chance to attend camp. And good luck to all of them. I'll be there on Wednesday morning, so bringing some more stuff there, and we'll breaking that down. Joe, you're going to be having a very detailed breakdown of one Sun Devil squad that really just put up some amazing performances and going back to back in the Pac-12 championship. But we have to tip our caps to another group of Sun Devils that are doing some amazing things. The men's swim and dive team back-to-back Pac-12 champs over the weekend at the Pac-12 Conference Championships. They won 16 times over the weekend, broke 11 school records and 3 NCAA records. Léon Marchand, the outstanding French swimmer, who's going to probably win a whole lot of gold medals in his home country in France at the Paris Olympics this summer, was the Pac-12 swimmer of the meet for the third year in a row. As you like to say, Joe, winning is good.
Man, I mean, what can you say? What else can you say about what the job that Bob Bowman's done with that swim program? And, you know, the wrestling program, obviously, which I'll break down here in a moment. Those two programs, at least in my eyes, are kind of attached at the hip, because you think about, you know, 15, 16 years ago, maybe 17, 2007, 8, whenever it was, I think it was 2008. I mean, there was a period of time where both those programs were cut from Arizona State University. Obviously, they came back very quickly, didn't miss any time of action. But you fast forward to right now, to where these are two elite programs, obviously with what Bob Bowman's doing, with Zeke Jones doing with wrestling. So, and obviously they're around the same time of year, you know, the same season. So they're doing these sort of things like right at the same time. So it's great to see. All the credit in the world to that swim program. What they've done these last couple of years is nothing short of amazing. I worked with that program when I was an intern, well before Bowman was there. And let me tell you, they, with all due respect, they weren't doing the kind of things that the ASU is doing right now there. So we'll see if the Devils can, get over that last hump. They've been a #1 team in the nation for a large chunk of the season. I certainly have to say, you know, not as fluent with the college swimming as I am with other sports, but they've got a shot. They've got a shot to win a national championship. And if that can happen, that would be outstanding, obviously in any context, but especially if you take that, you know, 15 to 20 year view of this is a program that for a hot minute did not exist at ASU. Then you fast forward and they're at the forefront of the national scene. Incredible stuff.
Well, there has been a lot of struggles for marquee Sun Devil sports throughout this scholastic year. I mean, you really got to, you know, be really impressed by, you know, of course, the wrestling program, water polo, and of course, men's swim and dive, just doing absolutely. Just it seems like every tweet with the Pac-12 account over the weekend was, this Sun Devil just broke this record. This Sun Devil broke another record, and then, you know, some NCAA school record. Just, it was an incredible scene, and this is not new, because they again have gone back to back. But ever since Bob Bowman's been in place, there, just an absolute, you know, just one of the premier programs in the country. On the other end of the spectrum, though, we got to talk about some men's hoops. Rough weekend in LA. There's another kind of capped by a huge collapse in the second half against the Bruins, but that wasn't even the story. That those crushing losses and disappointing losses that dropped ASU to 14 and 17 overall. But Jose Perez, just a matter of hours after leading the team against USC, left the squad and is now playing professionally. He's emerged playing for Plaza Valerio in the Santiago Superior Basketball Tournament in the Dominican Republic, where he put up 8 points, 5 boards, 4 assists in 40 minutes of an overtime loss. Now, that raised a lot of eyebrows, especially initially when the team took the floor pregame before UCLA, and all of a sudden, Jose Perez, who has been a stalwart performer and contributor for this team all season long, just wasn't there.
We know the story, you know, that brought him to Tempe, journeyman, to say the very least, several college programs at which he had played prior to coming to Tempe. But, man, he really brought something to ASU. That rec league style of ball was an interesting thing to see. But when you think that you've seen it all, and no one should be saying that in the modern day of college athletics, because you get surprised virtually every single day. That was odd, especially the timing of it, because – you know, realistically, it could and still can be said that ASU, you know, only had 2 games left of its season, which is very plausible. You know, that final regular season game and then in the Pac-12 tournament. But as you mentioned, he's already played a game for the Dominican Republic team that he's playing for. So at least, you know, to me, in my opinion, that validates it a little bit, or makes it a little bit more digestible. The fact that this was a very quick turnaround. You know, it's a professional decision. It would be one thing if he were just sitting around and didn't play, you know, any sort of basketball until May or June or something like that. Like, why couldn't you finish your college season? When you see him already playing in professional games, that at least says, okay, there was some weird urgency here. So, you know, it's something, again, that is a strictly professional decision based on some needs that he and his family have, to my knowledge. So you can't really throw too much shade at him for that. It's a weird situation, but timing doesn't always work out as much as we'd want to. In the end, as odd as it is, it would have been nice to see him remain at ASU, but all due respect, was his presence on the team going to be something that ignited a run to win the Pac-12 tournament and get ASU in the NCAA tournament? Odds are that wouldn't be the case. So they did make an impact. I think we've read that Frankie Collins and others have said that whole deal leading into that UCLA game was a factor, and that might have caused them to have some instability among the team that resulted in that late game collapse. Who knows? But like I said, as far as how consequential it is on the outcome of this season for ASU, I don't know that you can really stack it up on a massively high level.
Yeah, he's been catching a hell of a lot of heat from ASU fans since that news kind of broke. But as more details kind of came to light, I'm kind of with you, Joe. I don't have a huge problem with it. The timing does kind of suck for the team, just because anytime you leave, especially in this kind of a situation so close to the end, but when the family factors and the family needs, and it seems like he was able to get a financial payday really quick right off the bat, and we don't know necessarily the exact circumstances of that, but obviously when family needs come to the forefront, that kind of takes priority over everything, as much as fans would really like to say that they should stick it through and you've played the whole season with this team. And a lot of people, of course, pointing that ASU is his fifth college over the course of his college career. But yeah, again, I don't know that he's gonna really help this team. You go on, that has fallen to the 11th seed, as we'll talk about in a second, just making that run. I mean, in all likelihood, ASU's got maybe a game or two left in their season in Vegas, and then that'll be a wrap. So he was kind of fun to watch as the 25-year-old man, just kind of as you mentioned, kind of that rec ball style, just kind of bullying some guys, and just kind of an otherwise forgettable down year for Bobby Hurley's Sun Devils. But yeah, I think when the family needs came to light, and I think that's kind of the one misstep here. If there was perhaps some greater transparency, getting ahead of the messaging, and you saw even some of the teammates like Frankie Collins today at media availability was just kind of bummed. It seemed like the players and his teammates really had no idea, and they kind of found out, maybe perhaps like the rest of us. That's unfortunate. I think if there's something that comes up like that where family need is involved, and you put that first and foremost, I think that could have really kind of softened the blow and just maybe taking control of the messaging.
Yeah, and context obviously matters, like you're saying. I mean, if this would have been, Des Cambridge last year doing, that sort of thing. Again, I'm just putting together a total hypothetical situation like that would have hit pretty hard. And yeah, looked like Perez was having a great time. I mean, in some of those games that worked ASU's favor, that USC game at home and things like that, you could see he was having a blast. So, and again, I know that some of the messaging and the wording and things like that, especially on the early going, was tough to swallow for some fans. But, at the end of the day, you just kind of have to think, number one, we don't know his whole story. We don't know the needs that he has and his family has. And, what would any of us do if we were in that situation where he had a professional opportunity, and if there were a need, not trying to dive into his personal business, but you just, I don't get the impression that this was done to, slight Bobby Hurley and ASU and, leave town with this, with a sour taste in his mouth or things like that. So again, there's probably a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't particularly know about. But like you're saying, this team as a whole, it's a rough situation that ASU wasn't even without this, or if this hadn't happened, or before this matter with Perez. They've lost 3 in a row, 5 out of 6, 10 out of the last 13. I mean, since that 4-0 start in conference play, 4-12 record to finish, as you mentioned, 11th, just ahead of Oregon State. 8-12 in the conference, 14-17 overall. Just to kind of put this in another context, so ASU was 14-17. That was the same record ASU has right now is the final record in 21-22, which wasn't that like true COVID year in the sense of nobody in the stands, but there were still some games that were impacted. I think ASU lost, when I say lost, they didn't play a couple games that year. So statistically, if ASU were to go out in the Pac-12 tournament and be one and done, this would be the worst winning percentage that Bobby Hurley has had, and the worst for the team since a 10-win season under Herb Sendek in 2011-12. They play Utah in that opening game late Wednesday night. Now that's, I don't know, a favorable matchup, but ASU swept, and that's the only team that ASU played twice and swept this year. So I know that, the Sun Devils certainly don't have a lot of momentum going on, but I mean, if you got to pick a team to play the team that you've beaten twice.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just toss out there rivalry game. You never know what happens. What the hell? Because when you're going into this level of the season, that dropping, I have this in my notes here. Like just that 4-0 start. It obviously, I don't know if any ASU fan really believed that it was sustainable, but you got a sense, okay, maybe that we can exceed expectations. But then having them drop kind of consistently weekend after weekend, and just capped off with the Jose Perez saga. This is just kind of a very always something university type of season that just seems like it is heading to an early finish. Now, if they do get past Utah, the number 6 seed, I believe they'll match up against number 3 Colorado in the next round. They're on the kind of the bottom of the bracket, so they would have to face their the Wildcats until a potential final. But maybe we've seen weirder things happen, but. Yeah, just overall, I think we're planning on kind of taking a much deeper state of the program look at men's hoops here in a very upcoming episode. But this has just been a year that I know the expectations weren't necessarily sky high, but with a lot of intriguing pieces. It started off with the Adam Miller situation and saga there, and then capping off with the Jose Perez and just injuries, and it's just a real on-brand Arizona State marquee sports season.
Yeah, and you talked about the always something or the unpredictability of it all. As I mentioned, ASU's lost 5 of the last 6. What was that one win? Against Washington State, which at the time was the top team in the conference and a nationally ranked team, and they pull out the win over the Cougars at home. So, man, it's just a wild deal. Yeah, like you mentioned, there are a lot of people with a lot of speculations and wondering, and is Hurley going to be back? Is he going to step away? Are they going to do something? That's a conversation for another time. So we'll see. We'll see if what's gone on with just this skid of losing a lot of games and the Perez situation. Is that something that's going to fracture this team, or is it going to galvanize them to do what they can do? Because again, they swept Utah. It's a beatable team. They've done that. They can go out and win a game. Again, they've to get anywhere in the postseason, they got to win the whole thing, and that's very unlikely to happen. But for them to go out and maybe get a win, that's something that is plausible if they, get things together. But, again, you don't really know. We've seen multiple games with late collapses, close games at half or halftime leads for ASU that have resulted in not only losses, but like double-digit losses, like these massive runs that opponents go on and just make it look like a blowout on paper. I mean, essentially it is, if that's the score. So you do not know what to expect. And I guess you could say if things go as expected, even though I know that kind of contradicts what I just said, if you don't know what to expect, but if things follow the recent trend, it'll be a pretty long off season with a lot of talk. That whole NIL subject is its own conversation. So we will see how this weekend and maybe weekend treats ASU.
Right, so before we talk about, some happier notes of the Sun Devil wrestling program, just absolutely putting on a clinic at the Pac-12 championships. A tip of the cap to a outgoing, longtime Sun Devil administrator. Gene Boyd is reportedly calling it a career here pretty soon. First reported by Chris Cartman that he's capped on, I believe, a 29-year stint as an associate athletic director. One of the key guys. Of course, began was a Sun Devil football player as well, had some key moments on the field before being a real key part of that Sun Devil administration and really helping to make an impact on the lives both on and off the field of a lot of Sun Devil athletes.
Yeah, JB's one of the all-timers here. I mean, if you've been around this program in any capacity, for any extended period of time, you bumped into him, had conversations with him, had a good time with them. He's a down-to-earth dude, a great guy, somebody that really cares about Sun Devil athletics. Obviously, played here in the very early 90s, and just, as you mentioned, decades-long career as an admittable work years ago, working like on the academic side of things and fortifying that, moved into, an even greater role. And so he's been a constant, with change and turnover and things that are inevitable over the years. He's one of those guys, and there are obviously a few others. There are a lot of stalwarts in that athletic department, and he has been one of those. So I'm sure it's going to be quite a change. That's what he's known for decades of time, is Sun Devil athletics and being at the forefront of that. But again, he's as good as it gets. Deserves all the best in the world. And all the best to him in that. I'm sure he'll be around, every now and again, whether he's located in Arizona or not. I'm sure we'll see him around. And he influenced a lot of people at Arizona State, so that's going to be a very big void for the Sun Devil athletic department to fill.
And important to note, especially in the Sun Devil sources reporting, that he's not being forced out, not tied to the investigation by the NCAA. This is for family reasons. Recently married, and his wife's family in Colorado. And so, best wishes to Genie. I've talked to him. Every interaction I've had with him has been nothing but great. And of course, his track record kind of speaks for himself on that front. All right, Joe. Now let's talk some Sun Devil wrestling, because I'm not somebody too familiar with collegiate wrestling, but rumor has it they did some pretty good things.
At this time, it's like you have to collect. It's like you're in the woods and you got to collect berries and nuts for survival and things like that. Like, that's kind of what it is being a Sun Devil fan, a follower of this athletic department these days, where not all the news is very good news. But you know what? This past Sunday was a very good day for Sun Devil wrestling from start to finish at the Pac-12. Of course, the final Pac-12 tournament. So going to give you some insight, break things down. We're hoping to get Zeke Jones, of course, the legendary head coach, on here soon as ASU heads to NCAAs in the very near future, not this weekend, but the following. So ASU, through its dual meet schedule, was 7-6. They competed against some very, very prominent programs, ranked in the teens, went into the Pac-12 tournament maybe as the favorite, but there was some parity in the conference. There were a couple other programs that came in there with the belief and expectation to win the Pac-12 tournament. Last year, ASU didn't do so well. Oregon State won, and the Oregon State was the host. It was out there in Corvallis. So Sun Devils had a little bit maybe of revenge on their minds, and man, did that happen. So Sun Devils are Pac-12 champs, of course. That's the fourth time in 5 years. So what I want to illustrate first is just statistically how things worked out in their favor, in the sense of just the gap between them and the rest of the field and what that really means. So there are 6 teams in the Pac-12 for wrestling. The teams that placed 2nd through 5th, they were all from 2 to 5, separated by 18 total points. So pretty jammed in there, which you would expect of a high-level conference tournament when a lot is on the line. ASU scored 23 points more than the number 2 team, Arkansas Little Rock. ASU had 137.5 team points, and Little Rock placed second again with 114.5. It was just a full day from the very, very get-go. Just to put things into perspective again with that scoring, because I know that if folks don't follow wrestling, they don't know what one thing means over the other, and I'm like 5 years into being a wrestling fan at the collegiate level, so I'm just kind of learning some of these things on the fly myself. Across
and also, I'm sorry. Also, you mentioned like Arkansas Little Rock, because I was like Cal Poly's, and because I obviously not every Pac-12 school, in kind of what fans might know, has a wrestling team. So there is some unusual names that might show up in these, in this conference championship.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we're closing the book on it because the Pac-12 wrestling that basically ended it this past weekend. So yeah, there's 6 teams in the Pac-12 for wrestling, but there are only 3 of them that are your traditional Pac-12 teams. That's ASU, Oregon State, Stanford. Those are the only 3 teams or schools that have wrestling programs. USC doesn't, Oregon doesn't, that sort of thing. So you also have Arkansas Little Rock, which actually had a really good season. They're kind of a feel-good story of college wrestling, because they've only been around for a few years. And they have Cal Poly, which got a solid program, and Cal Bakersfield, which was steadily among the bottom of the programs in the Pac-12. But kind of putting that scoring into perspective, for ASU to be about 24 points ahead of second place, the last 3 years of Pac-12 tournaments have been decided by a total of 25.5 points. 2 years ago, Pac-12 tournament was at Desert Financial Arena. ASU won the tournament by 0.5 point. It came down to Colton Schultz coming in and doing his thing at the heavyweight. I mean, that's how razor thin it usually is at the Pac-12 tournament. ASU just walked away with it. So just how they got there and what it looked like. They started the day in the early rounds of the tournament with a lot of bonus points. What do I mean when I'm talking about bonus points? Okay, just like any sport, you can make a foul shot, get one in basketball. You can make a 2-pointer, you can make a 3-pointer, right? There are different ways you can score if you beat a guy in wrestling. And if you pin him, obviously you get more points than you would if you just win by a point or two. If you outscore your opponent by 8 or more points, or if you get to 15, these are different ways you can add up more points. So in the early rounds, ASU was pinning guys. They were outscoring them to high degrees that added up with team points. They just fired out of the gates, ready to compete. They built up a really healthy lead. The day is kind of split off into 2 sessions. Some of the preliminary rounds, then you get your final rounds to get your first through, because with a small conference, everybody's going to play, so you're going to get 1 through 6. So you figure that out as the day goes on. So basically the moral of the story here is that ASU just came out of the gates to start the day on Sunday doing some really good things, not wrestling timid. They came out very, very aggressive, and it worked in their favor. So as the day progressed and you got to the championship rounds, note that there are 10 weight classes in college wrestling. ASU had 7 finalists. So, they almost had a guy going for the Pac-12 title in just about every single weight class. And there were some tight ones, but ASU had a great deal of success as you got into that championship round with 5 guys that ended up winning Pac-12 titles. I did some quick research. It's only the 11th time in school history that 5 or more wrestlers claimed conference championships in the same year. So realistically, you can look at this and say that this is one of the best conference tournament performances that ASU's really ever had. Starting off at 125 pounds, Richie Figueroa, guy that's absolutely caught fire at the end of this regular season. He's someone in his first year really in action, because Brandon Courtney was a stalwart at that weight class for so long. But Figueroa was an elite recruit coming out of high school. He's someone that when you saw him compete a little bit early in his career, you knew that the sky's the limit. He made his way into the final and ended up beating Brandon Kaler of Oregon State, who beat Brandon Courtney last year for the conference title. Figueroa, barely by the skin of his teeth, won 2-1. But hey, that's all you need to do. Moving on to 133 pounds, the next group up, Julian Klebov for ASU. He fought hard. He finished second. Nasir Bailey of Little Rock is an elite talent. He's a freshman, but I think he's ranked 6th in the country. Klebov fought him. He lost 8-3, but those are matches that can really get away from you in a hurry. Guys can get pinned. They can get teched, basically where the opponent just racks up points and the match ends up being called prematurely, more or less. So that was even like a good, not a bad loss. You can put it that way. The one that I had my eye on the whole time heading into the weekend, the one that I wanted to see, and if you saw my slew of tweets over the course of Sunday afternoon and evening, was Jesse Vasquez at 141 pounds. This guy, I've felt for him so much these last couple of years, because this is a prime time, this is a big time wrestler. This is a guy that on a national scale could do some damage. He has just had the misfortune of late season-ending injuries each of the last 2 years. So he's a junior at ASU, and he's never competed in the Pac-12 tournament because he's gotten hurt each of the last 2 years. And he's a guy that could have multiple Pac-12 titles to his name had he been able to compete. And so he made it into the finals, and he faced the guy that a lot of folks figured he was going to face, the returning champion at 141, a guy by the name of Cleveland Belton. Cleveland Belton began his career at Arizona State University, transferred, followed Chris Pendleton, who came from Zeke Jones' staff, to become head coach at Oregon State. Last year, Belton won. He beat Emilio Izaguirre, who was essentially Vasquez's replacement late in the season. The guy who was a true freshman last year was Izaguirre. Burned his red shirt, only had a competition, a few matches, ended up making it to the conference final, lost to Belton. And Belton did a lot of jawing at Emilio at the end of that. And so I think there were some receipts due from ASU. Like I said, it's a deal where that guy used to be at Tempe. And Jesse Vasquez thankfully came out with a 5-2 victory. And if you watch the videos, Belton again getting in his face. I'm not going to say exactly how I feel about that individual and his behavior, but poor sport is about the most G-rated way I can do it. Very, very satisfying to see Jesse get the win, do it with class. He's a Pac-12 champ, and hopefully there are a few more in his future as well. So you get through those first 3 weight classes, ASU already gets 2 titles, what I'm saying. Move on to 149, Cal Parco. That dude is an unstoppable machine right now. You know, just like they do in all sports, they name a wrestler of the year for the Pac-12. I don't believe they've named it yet. I think it needs to be Cal Parco running away. Just a couple weeks ago, he beat the #1 wrestler in the country from Nebraska at the 149 weight class. That tells you anything about this guy in Cal Parco and what his ceiling is. He doesn't have one. He goes out, wins 5-1, gets his 3rd conference championship. So ASU's rolling. By the time they get there, I don't know at what point mathematically it was over and ASU had it locked up, but the success they had in those early rounds of the championship round really paved the way for that. You move on to 157. That's the next weight group up. You get Ja'Cory Teamer. It's a guy that missed all of last year due to injury, but before that he had won 3 Pac-12 championships. So he was trying to get on that short list of 4 Pac-12 titles. He did just that, winning 5-4 over Daniel Cardenas of Stanford. Ja'Cory still has a year left, so he's someone that obviously won't be a Pac-12 title, but he has the potential to win 5 conference titles, which is something that is obviously wild, but we're seeing that due to the COVID season and things like that. So again, ASU just rolling through the early standing of things. You move on in the finals. Tony Negron, he was in the final at 184, faced Trey Munoz of Oregon State, a guy that came to OSU from ASU. Munoz is a nationally elite wrestler. Tony fought with him. He lost 8-3, ironically the same score that Klebov lost to Nasir Bailey by at 133. But Trey Munoz is a seasoned performer. He's someone that, again, some of these matchups, it can go south in a hurry. Tony really, really fought there. And that's something to be proud of. He's someone that's very improved, up a couple weight classes. He was ASU's wrestler at 165 last year, so he's at 184, looking a lot better this year. He's one of the few seniors on this lineup, is Negron. So things were locked in. You move up, you get past the 197, you get to the heavyweights. You get Colin Schultz out there, and especially in that circumstance, you know, it's the bright lights. And things were already locked in for ASU. So that's the perfect storm for an absolute beast like Colton Schultz, a guy that is going to be in the Olympics in the future. And when I say the word future, that might be months, not years, that Colton Schultz is in the Olympics. He came out and he pinned Boone McDermott of Oregon State in 1 minute and 1 second. Colton Schultz is not a guy that works by the hour. You know, he's out there to do a job, get it done as quickly as possible. You saw him. ASU is lucky to have him in this program for a number of reasons. Number one, I mean, he is just a wonderful human being. It's really interesting to get to know some of these wrestlers, and they're the nicest people that you'll ever meet. They're, you know, these are not guys that are, you know, jerks to people or look at themselves as, you know, violent machines or something like that. They're normal human beings, but when it's time to compete, especially for a guy like Colton Schultz, again, world-class talent, he's just not going to let anybody beat him, and he's not going to leave it up to chance. He can manhandle people. Just people cannot physically move a guy like Colton Schultz. And so he came out, and that was just the icing on the cake. He made such short work of that guy, pinned him like it was nothing, and that was just the cherry on top for Arizona State. So ASU goes in, again, wall to wall, bell to bell, start to finish. A dominant performance. It's as good. I don't have, like I mentioned, I don't have a huge wrestling background, only about 5 years following the collegiate sport. That was as complete of a performance as I've ever seen from ASU, and they've had some very, very good ones. And that was something that you hoped would be the case, and you saw some trends because in the last few duels of the year, you saw things really, really coming together. Lost to Nebraska, but Nebraska, I believe, was like 3rd in the country at the time, and ASU really competed up until things went a little bit south in the last couple of weight classes. So what's next? What do we do now from here? Okay, you got the conference championship. You got 5 guys that won individual titles. What does this all mean? So in college wrestling, you have NCAA automatic qualifying allocations. Think about it in a similar context to, okay, like in basketball. Whoever goes out and wins that Pac-12 tournament, whether that's Arizona, whether that's ASU or anybody in between, they're automatically going to go to the NCAA tournament no matter what they did in the regular season. Similar deal in wrestling. How it goes is that there's some formula that's done by the NCAA, and for each conference, they allocate a certain amount of automatic bids per weight class. Always going to have the conference champion is going to get in automatically, and often you'll have maybe the second or third place guys will get there as well. The Pac-12 doesn't get a lot of automatic qualifying bids. The most at any weight class is 3, and there are some that only had 1. Put that in comparison to like the Big 12, of course, which ASU is going to be going into next year, and the Big 10. In the Big 12, every single weight class gets 5 or 6 automatic qualifying bids at each weight class. So that's an interesting topic, for itself. What does that mean right now? So of the wrestlers that performed for ASU, they had the 7 finalists. There are 7 total automatically qualifying NCAA tournament performers. Now, they're not the exact same 7. How does that work out? 6 of them are from that group of 7 that made it to the final round. Tony Negron did not get an automatic bid because at 184, there was only 1 bid, and that went to Trey Munoz, who defeated Negron. Kyle Valencia, of course, of the famed Valencia wrestling family at ASU, ended up winning some additional matches, and he claimed a spot at NCAA. So ASU has 7 of its 10 performers automatically going to the NCAA tournament. Now, the NCAA tournament in wrestling, it's about pretty much, you can sum it down to, how to be successful there. You can sum it up with 2 things. You want to qualify a lot of guys, as close to 10 as you can, and you got to have those guys win. Later this week, they're going to announce the at-large bids. Again, similar to other college sports, to where you don't get that automatic, but you get an at-large bid. I think Tony Negron has a good shot, a real good shot. Chance McClain at 165 is a possibility as well. It's possible that neither of them gets a bid. So you're probably looking at 7 or 8 wrestlers from ASU going to the NCAA tournament. Possibly 9, but I think that might be a little bit much. Just to put things into perspective, last year ASU finished 7th nationally at the NCAA tournament, and that's the final ranking. Doesn't matter what you do during the regular season at all. The place that you have at the NCAA tournament is basically, what you finished for the year. ASU finished 7th, and they qualified, I guess you could say, only 5 guys last year. Now, 4 of them made pretty deep runs into All-America status. That's how they got there. But again, you have at least 2 more than you did last year, maybe 3, maybe even 4. If you're qualifying more guys, that just gives you a better shot to do some really special things. Now then, the parity at the top, excuse me, or lack thereof in college wrestling, it's hard for me to give a comparison to what Penn State is doing in wrestling to another sport, because it exceeds the Alabama runs in football. Maybe like Oklahoma softball is the only thing I could really think of. It's really hard, again, to come up with a comparison. That Penn State is almost untouchable. So I know that I'm bringing up a lot of exciting things, and for folks who may not be too attentive to college wrestling, might say, wow, does ASU have a chance at winning a national championship? I'm not going to say they don't. Just saying that to knock Penn State off the ladder is going to take pretty much an act of God. But for ASU to maintain, again, it finished 7th last year, 4th each of the last 2 years. So we're talking top 8 finishes each of the last 3 seasons. That's definitely within reach. So I don't care who you are, especially with the things that are going on in Sun Devil Athletics, where there just isn't a lot of high-level success, especially in the revenue programs right now. The wrestling program can go out there to NCAAs and claim another top 8 caliber finish, and to string 4 of those along. That's something that to me would be mighty, mighty impressive, and that's very much on the table with the amount of guys that they've qualified and how well ASU is wrestling right now. So they're really hitting their stride at the perfect time. And then just a little bit of a look ahead beyond NCAAs. Again, as I mentioned, this is not a senior-heavy team. There are guys that have been around forever. I mean, Colton Schultz feels like he's been around forever. Ja'Cory Teamer feels like he's been on this squad since I was in college. But with the redshirting rules in wrestling and the COVID year, there are a lot of guys that are going to be back. As far as the main 10 that they work with, Tony Negron at 184 pounds, he's the only senior. So they bring back just about everybody for next year in that first year in the Big 12. The Big 12 is a big deal in wrestling. I like to compare it to like the Big 10 in football, to where, okay, the SEC in football is the unquestioned, top dog conference. In wrestling, that's the Big 10. But the Big Ten in football is that next one up. And I think a lot of people would obviously agree about that. That's the Big 12 in wrestling. So ASU is jumping up to what I think many would agree is the second best conference in collegiate wrestling. So that's going to be a challenge. As I mentioned, that's going to offer more opportunities for NCAA qualifiers next year. So that's, again, a conversation for another time. But there's short and long-term reasons for a great deal of excitement. And I just encourage everybody out there, even if you've never watched college wrestling in your entire life, just check out the NCAA tournament. It's chaos. It's amazing, incredible chaos. You'll you get the view, and you've got like 6 or 8 mats going on at any one time. So, you can just watch a lot of ridiculous things that are going on all at once. It's awesome. It is awesome. I strongly encourage y'all to check it out. I think that you'll love it. And like I said, the bottom line of it is ASU's got a tremendously successful program that is primed for a very, very good run. So Sun Devils everywhere should be incredibly proud of how this program is coached, how it's run, what Zeke Jones and his entire staff are doing. There's a tremendous amount of talent. And like I mentioned, they are hot at the right time. So it's going to be a really exciting time at the NCAA tournament. So just to underscore it, to sum it up, absolutely dominant performance in Corvallis. And that was an extra thing that was very sweet, because ASU's interaction with Oregon State wrestling is probably certainly the closest thing that it has to a rivalry in the sport. So to get that win in overwhelmingly impressive fashion in the House of Oregon State, the team that won it last year, that kind of took that one away from ASU, because of course Sun Devils have been the standard bearer for many years in Pac-12 wrestling. Very, very sweet deal. So, I can't say enough good things about what Zeke Jones is doing there, and we'll see what he's got in store for Sun Devil fans coming up at NCAAs.
Winning is indeed good. So the wrestling squad, along with the men's swim and dive team, providing some much needed positivity for Sun Devil sports here in recent weeks. And so, yeah, as Joe mentioned, we will be covering them a little bit more in depth as they make their run to the NCAAs here in the next week. Now let's turn our attention to a team that's still trying to find its footing. And to do that, let's make a call to the bullpen. All right, joining us now to take a look at the Sun Devil baseball program as they are about, the kind of roughly the quarter season mark here. Some good, some bad, and a lot of things to sort through. And so we are bringing back our guy from devilsdigest.com, Scott Sandulli. I think this is back-to-back canonical, mainline series episodes for you. That's quite an honor.
I'm truly honored to be here. It's a pleasure. Been a long-time listener, and it's a true full circle moment now to be a part of it.
I don't think Jack Loader ever went back to back. So there you go. Immediate bragging rights for you.
All right. I'll have to.
Jack does have a picture wearing this football helmet that I'm pointing at right now. So, we got some ups and downs. We might have to get one with you in that,
right.
To rub it in. Good old Jack. All right. So let's dive into it, man. So we're 15 games deep for ASU. Sun Devils are 7-8. How do you assess the team overall through these first 15 games, maybe compared to what you would have expected in the early stretch, like in the preseason?
7-8 at this stage of the season isn't too far off from what I was thinking at the start of the year. I'm not surprised that they didn't win a game in Texas, and that's no knock on ASU itself. A&M and TCU, those are two teams that can be the last team standing in Omaha. But there's been some slip-ups. 2 out of 3 from Santa Clara on the opening weekend of the season is fine, but splitting 2 with Ohio State was a bit of a surprise to me. The Buckeyes didn't come into this season really too high on the radar of the Big Ten, but they surprised a lot of people on that weekend, and Willie Bloomquist believes that that's a team that's going to win a lot of games, and based off what I saw, I think so as well. But there's been some bright spots in there. As I said, Santa Clara, the reigning WCC champions, took 2 out of 3 from them to start the year. Took a midweek game from a ranked Kansas State team. Even showed some fight against TCU and the second Texas A&M game, coming back from a couple of big deficits. Even the first game against Oregon this past weekend was a real fun one as well. And if you have 2 or 3 or 4 pitches go your way in Saturday and Sunday, there's a good chance ASU could have swept a team that went to a super regional last year. So they're on the cusp, I feel like, of being a really good team, but there's still a little bit of a ways to go. And Bloomquist and the entire team does know that.
So you kind of mentioned it in your responses there. Obviously, in the last 2 weeks, ASU is 2-5. You talked about that trip out to the great state of Texas, playing some ball in the home of the world champs. It wasn't too favorable for the Devils, but maybe a good learning experience. So that 2 week, skid, I guess you could call it that, of 2-5. How much of that is just playing some pretty good teams? How much of that is in-house stuff that ASU really needs to clean up?
I'd credit it a lot to it being they're playing some really darn good teams. Like we said, over in Texas, those are road games against Texas A&M and TCU. Both are in the D1 baseball top 10 as we speak. And TCU went to Omaha last year. A&M went to Omaha the year before. So two fantastic programs with a whole lot of talent. And it really kind of showed to Bloomquist the barometer that ASU's got to live up to if they want to be able to contend on a national stage like the Aggies and the Horned Frogs have. So I'm not totally surprised they went down to Texas and didn't come back with a win aside from the midweek against UT Arlington. But they didn't. There are some moments where they didn't do themselves any favors. I thought they played cleaner baseball against Oregon this past weekend. The bullpen really shined throughout Texas and against Oregon. But all of a sudden, those dangerous and devastating bats that crushed through Santa Clara, Kansas State, and Ohio State even, gone a little quiet. Not so much to where it's a total panic button, at least from my perspective, but they're not getting as many base runners as they were at the start of the season. There's not a lot of big innings and crooked numbers really going up. I think that's just they're facing better arms, and it's time to adjust to that. But there are some signs of concern in a couple of individual guys. I was concerned about Ryan Campos coming into this weekend. I think he hit 3 home runs this weekend, so what do I know? But Jacob Tobias, I think he's been pressing a little bit as well. Kevin Karstetter was out of the lineup for a mental reset after hitting a little bit of a slump. And, of course, the injury to New Contratus, one of their outstanding third baseman who was expected to play a huge role offensively, is going to keep him out for a while. So it's a lineup that they're still – I think they figured out where everyone needs to go. But there's – as Bloomquist said, they're getting individual performances, but they got to turn it into team performances now.
Going back to the games in Arlington, of course, ASU is a historic blue blood power. A lot of the fan base maybe still views them as such, but going up against those current elite teams in the nation, quite a gap there. At times you're seeing where ASU is now and where they want to be against, up against like the A&Ms and the TCUs of the world. How much of a gap do you think does exist at this point, and is ASU really on a trajectory, you think, to reach that level of competition?
Well, championship programs are not built overnight. It took a lot of years for A&M and TCU to get to where they were. Kirk Saarloos, it took him, I think it was 9-10 years almost at TCU before he got himself to Omaha with the Horned Frogs. And so you go and look at Willie Bloomquist, it is year 3, but where this program is as to where it was 2 years ago, it is night and day, in my opinion. In 2022, they were looking for all the way up and down the roster for guys that can get them 27 outs, and that's not the case anymore. There is genuine talent here, in my opinion. This is a tournament talent caliber team. They just need to be able to put it together. Like Texas A&M and TCU, those are whole nother beasts pretty much. I mean, A&M, I think they're one of 2 teams in the entire country that's still undefeated, like 16-0, and TCU, I think they're like 11-2, just lost their first series of the weekend to Kansas. But those are elite teams with elite talent, and I think ASU, it has the name brand to it, 5 national championships, and there's a ton of talent in that clubhouse, and I think it's all about just getting them to realize the expectation at ASU is what they went up against in Texas. And I think that I don't necessarily think that gap is very huge between where ASU is and the A&M and TCUs of the world are now, but there is still definitely some room for improvement, and that starts with getting back to the tournament this year, of course.
So let's talk about some of that talent that they've got in the clubhouse that you referred to. A guy that's really standing out right now at the plate, Brandon Compton, leading the team in average, OPS, slugging, doubles, second in hits, home run, RBI. He's really shown something after being injured for last year. What makes him such a capable hitter in his first year of action?
Everyone I've talked to among ASU baseball says no one works harder than Brandon Compton, and you can really see it when he's up there at the plate. And it's crazy to me that even with his success leading the team in average and OPS, he's hitting around 6th or 7th in the lineup. That's a testament to the talent they've got there, but also how Compton can kind of give you anything. He can punch you a single through the left side. He can crush one over the center field wall. And the crazy thing about him is he was recruited originally as a pitcher. Willie Bloomquist said he saw his bat as a plus, just a little extra incentive in case he ever needed it. And now Compton's taken on the full-time DH role, and he's thrived in it, been able to hit lefties just fine from the left-handed batter's box. Changing speeds hasn't been a problem for him. He's just really been slowing the game down for himself and putting really good swings on the ball. And that's really all it takes sometimes to get in a groove. And if anyone's really rolling with this offense, you got to start the conversation with Brandon Compton, no doubt.
Talked about some other guys in that lineup. Isaiah Jackson has all the tools in the world, and coming back down to earth a little bit after that scorching start. And, as you mentioned, Ryan Campos showing some good pop there, but hitting a very un-Campos-like, the 250s at this point. Any significant cause for concern from the kind of the duration of the season from those two guys?
I wouldn't necessarily think so. Campos, we've seen it through his 2 years. He's as steady as they come, even after the first – I think it was after the Texas series when I talked to Bloomquist. He said that he was not worried at all about Campos getting going. We come back the next weekend, he hits 3 home runs against a pretty darn good Oregon staff. So I think Campos finally – he's always kind of started the season slow at ASU. I think he's starting to rev it up now. I think it'll be a very, very key cog to this lineup, and I think he even got bumped down to 5th in the order. I think it was Saturday against Oregon, and responded by hitting a home run. So, and then 2 more the next day. So I think Campos is just fine. That may have been a little bit of a wake-up call for him. Jackson, like you said, Brad, all the tools in the world, so much talent oozing out of that kid, and swagger. There is no doubt in my mind that he'll be able to get it going too. He talked a lot about how he was able to kind of put the selective amnesia into his game where he can go 0 for 4 one day and 4 for 4 the next day over the summer. And I think we are seeing that on the field, as while he's not absolutely scorching the ball like he was to start the year, his maturity in the batter's box is a lot better, and his strikeouts are way down. I don't know exactly what his chase rate is, but I'm sure that is way down. He's seeing breaking balls a lot better out of the hand. He's just more of a hitter when he was kind of like the flair for the dramatic last year, kind of taking that next step towards the professional approach.
Now, given the state of the pitching staff, which we'll dive into a little bit more here in a moment, do you think this is a lineup now that, of course, getting a guy like McLean back in the lineup and what we've seen through so far through these first 15 games, that is going to be capable of, producing 7, 8, 9, perhaps even double-digit runs on a nightly basis as the staff kind of tries to find its footing?
I think we've seen it. They put up double digits in every game against Santa Clara. Gave TCU 9 runs. But like Bloomquist said this past weekend, the individual performances are certainly there with guys like Compton and Campos this past weekend. So what they're looking for now is to have that continuity where you can just pass the baton all the way throughout the order. And every hitter stereotypes like that. Like, there's no 3 outcome hitters in this lineup. They all have the ability to go get a knock and give it to the next guy. And we saw that against Santa Clara and against Kansas State. So it's definitely in them. I think it's kind of taking a step back just because of the caliber of teams they played. A&M, TCU have fantastic arms, as does Oregon. So I think as they adjust to these better arms, the lineup's going to be just fine. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them putting 7, 8, 9 runs up pretty much throughout the rest of the spring every night.
So heading into the season, obviously, it was no secret that pitching was the biggest concern. And with the team ERA over 7 at this point, not much has really been done to mitigate those concerns. How much of it do you think is just a matter of these guys need more reps? Some of them are younger, inexperienced. And how much of it is they just may not have enough talent to really get over that hump?
In my opinion, I believe that the talent and the stuff on the pitching staff is there to be formidable. But like you said, there's a lot of inexperience. There are so many freshmen that are in this bullpen, and including the Friday night starter, Thomas Burns, a freshman as well. But there have been some bright spots from a lot of guys. The bullpen went on a very good streak these last 2 weeks. I think they went 20 innings without giving up an earned run. A big part of that was Ryan Schieffer, righty from Central Arizona College. He has been absolutely nails, as Sean Fitzpatrick put it. And Fitzpatrick himself, the lefty who came from Arkansas, didn't have the greatest start to the year, but has seemed to hone it in a little bit, find the zone a little bit more. Guys like Ben Jacobs has had a lot of bright spots. Cole Carlone, aside from the blown save against Oregon on Saturday, had been really solid as well. They've been able to stretch him out a little bit as he went, I think it was 3 innings against Texas A&M in that Sunday game. And the rotation's a little bit of a hit or miss. Thomas Burns has electric stuff with a 95, 96 mile-an-hour fastball. And he has had some control problems with that, but he's been able to improvise with a pretty darn good changeup that's had some hitters off balance. Connor Markle has been a real steady guy as well from the left-handed side, kind of what we expected out of him. He'll give you 2, 3, 4 runs while we'll go 5 innings. So he'll keep you right in the mix every time he goes out there. Tyler Meyer, it had looked bleak through his first 3 starts of the year, but he came out against Oregon on Sunday and started 3 innings, hadn't given up a hit before a couple of mistakes. Lost him there in the 4th inning, but I think he turned a corner with that performance against the Ducks. And so there's a lot of talent, but you kind of have the letdowns. Jonah Giblin hasn't been what they were expecting as a senior leader out of the bullpen. Matt Cornelius did not have a great outing against Oregon last week. So they're not getting everything they need out of the pitching, but I think there is enough for them to at least work with that kind of a lineup.
So you talked about Thomas Burns, of course, the Friday night starter, came in as a true freshman, the first in years to do that for ASU on opening night. You gave a little breakdown of him, so we can kind of shortcut through this question. What do you like from him so far, and what would your advice be for him, I guess, to work on through the remainder of this season?
Well, I was never a pitcher, so I'm not sure what I could really give to him. But Thomas Burns he's got a lot of talent up there on the mound. Real diamond in the rough, I feel like that ASU found out of Wisconsin. Throws really hard, like I said, 95-mile-an-hour fastball. I've been told he's got 97 in him if he really needed it. And where he's really impressed me is that when he's gone wild with his fastball, that his changeup and his breaking stuff has been there. And it's got guys really off balance. I think if he can just hone in that fastball, he's going to be a real legit guy for ASU in the coming years, should he stick around. And what I really like about him is his composure. You don't see a lot of freshmen kind of go out there, and I don't think I've seen him get rattled, even with, he gave up 3 runs in the first inning to Texas A&M on Friday night. I think he came back and pitched 5 innings of 1-run ball against one of the best lineups in the entire country. So Burns has that kind of mental fortitude and really a kind of gamer kind of attitude. And Bloomquist sees that, and he said how much of a tough kid he is, and we all see it watching him go out on there on the mound. So I think there is a whole lot of room for Thomas Burns to really come into his own as the season goes on.
So with this, the 3rd straight season that the pitching's really kind of been a concern for Bloomquist Devils. How much I've seen some folks out there maybe getting a little unhappy with the work, the kind of the common denominator of just kind of new arms come and go. But pitching coach Sam Peraza is still there. How much do you lay kind of maybe at the feet of Sam Peraza? Is there things he can do better, or do you think that just kind of this case, especially this year, a lot of new and young arms?
Well, with so many group of freshmen like this, it's hard to really give a knock on Bloomquist or Peraza. There's so many new guys in this room, and it's hard to come back after losing. I think it was 5-6 arms to the draft last year of a team that statistically wasn't even the greatest on the mound. There was a lot of talent with guys like Owen Stevenson, Christian Curtis, and Ross Dunn that ended up going to the pros that they thought they were going to be keeping. So a lot of these guys that have big roles, they didn't anticipate that when they had them coming in last year, because they thought they were going to bring back some pretty talented arms. So it's hard to really blame them for kind of the lack of senior leadership, really, I would say. But the guys they have are talented, and the guys they have are workable. And there are guys that have really shined under Bloomquist and Peraza's tutelage, such as guys like Ryan Schieffer so far this year, what we've seen out of Thomas Burns, Tyler Meyer coming back from injury as well. So in my opinion, this isn't a Peraza or a Bloomquist problem as to why the pitching staff still isn't on to par with what a lot of people expect out of Arizona State. It's just this staff is really young, and a lot of these guys got thrown into the fire against some of the best lineups in the country really early when they weren't expected to at this time a year ago.
Now, if you were to put together a to-do list for Willie Bloomquist, the staff, all the players, on things that they might want to work on or areas that they can focus on through the remainder of the season to maximize the potential of this team, what would be some of the items on that list?
Well, this is why I'm not a manager, but I think some things that they need to kind of touch on as they go through the rest of the season. They have the notion that they've gone through a gauntlet to start the season. So it's not like you can't underestimate any competition, but they're not going to be facing a lineup like A&M's or a staff like Oregon's for a little while here now. So what you kind of need to preach to them if I'm Bloomquist is that you didn't sink against maybe one of the toughest schedules in the country to start the year. So as we go into Pac-12 play, all these guys are going to have all that valuable experience from playing some really, really good teams and knowing what they saw from them, what they can take from them both on the field and off the field to become a winning team and a program with a winning culture as well.
So with all due respect to this midweek game against New Mexico coming up, there is one that even though the opponent doesn't have the best record in the world, it'll be a battle. Anytime ASU and U of A link up, that is the case. It's down in Tucson. Just how crucial is this upcoming weekend series against the Wildcats?
This is massive. I don't underestimate the fact that this series could really decide the outcome of the rest of the season for Arizona State. They're coming in one game under 500 prior to the midweek. They play against New Mexico on Tuesday. But with the performances that they put forth in promising 2 out of 3 from Santa Clara, beating Kansas State, and then the disappointments of coming home winless from Texas and dropping the series from Oregon, Arizona lost a lot from a team that went to the tournament last year. As you said, the record's not the best, but it's a rivalry. And the record hasn't necessarily mattered in the past, or the history of the two teams hasn't necessarily mattered in the past. It's a clean slate every time they meet. We saw last year they met 4 times in the regular season. ASU swept the Wildcats at Muni and went down to Tucson and lost 20-0. So anything can happen in this kind of rivalry. It's a real energetic matchup. Guys come ready to play, and Bloomquist being an alumni of the maroon and gold, he is going to hammer it into these guys that this is a series. I am not going to let you lose. So it is going to be of vital importance for ASU to get back on a winning note by taking this series against an Arizona team that is not the same that they looked last year, so they can get some momentum to take into Pullman for Washington State and Cal at the end of the month.
How much do you think that drubbing down in Tucson? Because I know Willie, and I mean, I'm not a guy that likes U of A, but Willie's a dude that just really, really doesn't like them. We could use some stronger words for sure. I know that he doesn't need extra motivation for this matchup, but how much do you think that last appearance in Tucson and what that final score was is going to be maybe a little bit extra motivation for this weekend series?
If I know anything about Willie Bloomquist and the fact that 20-0 loss may have been the difference in Arizona State being left out of the NCAA tournament last year, that man is going to go into Tucson with a vengeance, and he is going to portray it onto every single player wearing a Devils uniform on that bus. That is, as you said, of all the coaches and people I've talked to at Arizona State, I don't think there's more disdain for Arizona than out of Willie Bloomquist. So I believe he is going to really hammer it into these guys that this series is big, not just because we need to get this thing turned around a little bit, but also because they can do it against Arizona, and an Arizona team that's a little more vulnerable in years past.
So kind of pulling back a little bit to more higher level views, like many coaches, Willie Bloomquist has kind of bemoaned the state of college sports in regards to NIL, the transfer portal, and such. But we've seen a coach like Kenny Dillingham on the younger end of the spectrum, be really aggressive and kind of willingly jumping in and being aggressive in the kind of the new landscape. Whereas Willie seems to be a guy who's often talked about kind of the old school ways and the old school mentality. Is there any concern, kind of longer term as the shape of college athletics continues to evolve, that he might be able to keep up with the current landscape?
Well, in college baseball, it's a little bit like college football in that the SEC rules. They've got the money down there, and they lure guys in. The SEC puts 10 or 11 teams into the college baseball tournament every single year. So it's hard to keep up with those guys. And Bloomquist felt the brunt of that just last year. Star freshman shortstop Luke Hill ended up bolting out of ASU for Ole Miss late in the transfer portal. So I think he's aware of the fact that there's bigger boys out there. But like Dillingham, I think Bloomquist sees the value in the Arizona feel and the local guys. There are so many local Arizonans on this team. Brandon Compton, Isaiah Jackson, Josh Butler, plenty more. Ryan Campos, plenty more. I'm not mentioning, but they're keeping a lot of guys at home. They're activating the Valley in their own way. And I really do think there is a ton of baseball talent around this area. You look at a guy like Cam Anitti over at Saguaro, who's an LSU commit, likely going to be a first-round pick in the draft. So guys come out of here. There was plenty of talent here in the Valley, and I think Bloomquist and Sam Peraza do a good job of picking their guys that they can get out of that. And they also do good of kind of trying to find the diamonds in the rough, like the Thomas Burnses of the world. So it is a lot like football in the fact that there is obviously money elsewhere, and it's going to be hard to keep up with that. But I think Bloomquist does the best he can with the opportunity he's been given here at Arizona State.
Sun Devil baseball fans are nothing if not very passionate, and of course, with the blue blood, his history behind them, the expectations year in year out are very sky high. I know the fan base is getting a little restless that the fact that this team hasn't made the tournament in a little bit in the postseason. If ASU kind of continues on this course, is kind of a 500-ish team, and ultimately doesn't end this third year with a postseason berth, what kind of temperature do you think Bloomquist's seat might have, heading into year 4?
Well, going through 3 years at Arizona State baseball without a tournament is one that you don't get to pull off very often and get away with scot-free. But I think the fact that it is Willie Bloomquist, ASU royalty, was the leader of a team that played in the College World Series. I think there's a bit of a longer leash, especially with the fact that the athletic director search still is ongoing. So I think that even if they were to tread 500 this year and to miss the tournament, people would be upset, and they would have a right to be, but especially with the talent on this team. But considering the administrative stuff with ASU athletics right now and Bloomquist's status as pretty much a legend of Arizona State baseball, the seat would be hotter. But I don't think it would be case to find a replacement yet.
Well, it's going to be an interesting rest of this 2024 season, and certainly a lot to talk about in the weeks ahead. Scott, thanks for coming on again, giving your insight. Encourage all our folks to head over to devilsdigest.com and catch all of Scott's great coverage of this Sun Devil baseball team. And you've gone back to back, so I'm sure in the weeks ahead you'll be no stranger to the Speak of the Devils airwaves. Scott, thank you.
Can't wait to come back. Thank you, fellas, for having me on.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Speak of the Devils. I'd like to thank our guest, Scott Sandulli of devilsdigest.com. Even though it is still the offseason, it's heating up here. Spring ball is just a few weeks away. Of course, wrestling is heading to the NCAAs. Baseball's going on. Men's swim and dive could be making a run at a national title of their own. Water polo is doing a hell of a good job as well. A lot of good things going on. So make sure you stay with us on the social media side. You can follow the show on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, on Instagram at Speak of the Devils. Subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Facebook, and give me a follow on social media at bdenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healy42. Huge shout out, of course, as always, to our incredible sponsors: Jones Auto Group, devilsdigest.com, Cactus Sports, Burrito Express, Spaghetti Shack, and Sun Devil Family Charities.
And when you're done supporting our amazing sponsors, make sure to drop us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And also, shop at homefieldapparel.com. Use offer code SOTD23 for 15% off your first order. Over 180 schools with amazing, comfortable, vintage collegiate apparel, including an ASU collection that has some really, really impressive pieces there as well. Also, Joe and I will be back next week, and also we'll be back on TV as well as we break down what happened with Sun Devil basketball, ASU wrestling hitting the NCAAs, and spring football is almost here.